Okay, I guess we're just gonna go live now because I moved the intro file, and there's gonna be no intro for this. Haha. Hey, you want to just kick us off?
Yeah, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Adeljabar. What's up, Danny? How are you?
Chilling, man, as per usual. I'm really pissed because I cleaned up my computer and I moved the video intro file for our live stream. And when I went to go play the video intro file, it failed. And yeah, I'm feeling pretty stupid for that.
Well, why don't you cry me a river?
I might. I might.
So, do you ever get what is the weirdest song that you get stuck in your head? Or the weirdest theme? Doesn't have to necessarily be a song. It could be like a theme or something like that.
There was like a month-long period where I couldn't unhear Baby Shark for some reason.
What's
Baby,
that? What's Baby Shark?
you don't want to know, but Google it on your own time. Baby Shark, do 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 do. Baby Shark, do 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 do. That's
Huh.
literally like the entire fucking song is like that.
So the weirdest song I ever get stuck in my head, and it just pops in randomly all the time. It's not a song.
Hmm.
It's the theme music from Pokemon Red and Blue, the original.
Okay, like right when you turn on the game, like that
Yeah,
song.
like do do do
Mm-hmm.
do 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 do. The one that's used in the background in Smash Brothers
Yep.
in the arena.
Mm-hmm.
It
Love it.
just, it popped in my head today while I was just doing some kind of menial task, and I'm like, why? Like, why does this song haunt me for so many years? This game came out when I was in fifth grade,
It was
wherever
it
I
was
I was
formative.
young.
It was
Uh,
formative.
but I mean, who would have thought that those jingles, those video game themes, will just never leave your head.
Yo, on the topic of
Um,
jingles, a lot of those are really good. Like Celino and Barnes. You ever hear
so,
the Celino and Barnes one?
well, Barnes just
Yeah,
died.
I heard. Yeah,
He died in a plane
not.
crash.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say non-COVID related. He just died. But like I will always till the day I die know the phone number for Celino and Barnes injury
Eight,
attorneys.
eight, 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 eight.
Eight
Yeah,
eight eight
now
eight.
it's just Salino. And then the best one is 1-800 Cars for Kids.
Oh God, no! It's not the best one. It's the worst one.
It's the worst one.
It's
And
literally
then
the
there's
worst one.
the best one ever is 666 six
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 sixty
six six.
six
The number 6.
to get a cab in like fucking New York. That's not even a
You
thing anymore.
you only know these jingles if you're in New York.
Yeah,
These are all
sorry.
like local commercials, so I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But 666 666 and the number 6.
Yeah,
Um,
it was a satanic jingle.
and they would play over and over and over again. These three 1-800 Cars for Kids,
Celino and
666
Barnes.
Celino Barnes would come on about 6 times each during a Yankee game.
Yep.
So they they are ingrained in everyone's heads. All right, let's get into today's episode. So we're gonna avoid talking election politics,
I'm so happy about this. I
and
know you are.
yeah, I'm just done following it. There's just so I just can't do it anymore. I can't. I just don't have the. I could still follow it, but I don't feel like talking about it on the podcast anymore. I think people need to take a break from it right now. I
Yep.
think it's the healthiest thing is to just turn off the TV for a month and then see what happens a month later. There's
So,
nothing you can do anyway.
yep.
There's nothing you can do, no matter what side you're on. There's nothing
So
you
to
can do.
lighten your mood, we're gonna talk a little bit about fucking war zones and conflicts in the Horn of Africa.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about. I mean, this is honestly a really terrible thing.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about Ethiopia today. There really hasn't been too much coverage, except for the New York Times. The New York Times has actually been doing excellent coverage, and they have been doing excellent coverage on Ethiopia for years now.
Hmm.
And essentially, a real nightmare is happening. A war is pretty much breaking out right now between pretty much divided by ethnic lines between the central government along with the North Tigray region and Um, it looks like things are about to get very, very violent. There's already been about 1,000 casualties, 1,000 dead, and this conflict has been going on for about a week at this point. So it's really been ramping up. And a war in Ethiopia, in that part of the world, is going to mean hell, not only for Ethiopia but for all the neighboring countries. War could spill into countries like Sudan and Somalia, and just the Horn of Africa can just end up being really, really, really pounded by this. So, can you bring us up to speed? Like what's happening right now? High level stuff. The issue with this is that there's actually a media blackout on the ground right now, so not a lot of information is coming up.
Right, right. So this is actually it's been pretty hard to get like really like on the ground details about this shit, but here's what we got so far. So on the 4th of November, the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, he basically started a military offensive against some forces in the Tigrays, in the region of Tigray, against the political party, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or the TPLF, which we'll refer to it as moving forward. And they're basically the governing authority in that northern region of Ethiopia. And this is coming after months of tensions between the TPLF and the Abiy administration. This latest like military action was basically started because there was evidently a nighttime assault by the TPLF on a major Ethiopian National Defense Force base in Tigray, which resulted in the killing of some non-Tigrayan soldiers, and apparently they also tried to make off with some armaments, some heavy artillery and other weapons. So this was like a breaking point for the federal government and for the Prime Minister Abiy, which basically he then declared, full out like war against the Tigray. And he says that that was like the red line. They had crossed the last red line. And we'll talk about like the events that led up to it and why there was so much tension there, of course. But it's been, as you said, going on for about a week now. The military operation is still targeting Tigray's military establishments and the TPLF leadership, though not its citizens, according to the federal government. I can't independently verify that. All I know is that thousands of people have died. 1,000 people have died, at least. At least this is the best numbers that we can find so far. But the reason why we can't really know a whole lot just yet is because evidently there is a state of emergency declared on Tigray from the federal government and by the Council of Representatives, which are in Ethiopia. And they've effectively isolated it from the rest of Ethiopia, and they've implemented a phone blackout and an internet blackout in the entire region. So it's really hard to get like really, really accurate information out of there, but we're following it pretty closely. Any questions?
As closely as we can, which is difficult. There are reports of people. At this point, I just been hearing things about. Amnesty International has been releasing stuff about there being potential like massacres and atrocities there, which I'm sure there are.
Probably
because the reason why this is so Ethiopia is a unique country. They're the 12th largest country in the world. So Ethiopia is the second largest country in Africa. They have a population of 110 million people.
Right.
So this isn't like a small country like Libya with less than 10 million people. This country has a humongous population compared to the rest of Africa.
It's also got a very strong economy, and it's a big like player in African geopolitics as well. The seat of the African Union is in Ethiopia and Addis Ababa, and just that whole region is basically propped up by the Ethiopian stability and security forces.
And Ethiopia, in a lot of ways, is propped up by the U.S. Ethiopia serves as like the U.S. policeman in the Horn of Africa. So let's just say if we want to invade Somalia, we're not going to go invade Somalia with U.S. troops. We're going to send Ethiopia to do it.
Right.
But what makes this, I guess, the genesis of this is that there are between 80 to 90 different ethnic groups within Ethiopia.
Yep.
And the dominant
Extremely,
groups,
yeah, extremely
it's
diverse. Yeah.
it's very diverse, and the dominant groups are the Oromo, the Amara, the Somali, and the Tigray. The Tigray is a well group up in the north. The
Hmm.
Oromo right now is the group that they're the majority, but they have control over the government right now. The prime minister right now is Oromo. However, over the past years, for pretty much all of Ethiopia and its modern constitution, they've been ran by the minority coalition, the Tigray, which
Hmm.
is about 5-6% of the
The
population.
TPLF, right?
Now, Ethiopia has a long history of state formation dating back to the first century BC. So I guess the majority of their history has really been mainly ruled by monarchies. Like
Hmm.
there hasn't really been a modern nation state, but there's been empires and going back to who knows. But
Super rich history, like their
yeah, it's
ancient
very
history, like super long. Like they go back to like Solomon's time. Like King Solomon in the Bible and the Torah. Like these guys are old as dirt.
and modern history goes. I guess you can start modern history just for shits and gigs. If you want to start in 1974, that's when they were taken over by a communist military dictatorship. Because Ethiopia never didn't have the same level of colonization as let's just say the Sudan did
Well,
by the British and
actually,
the French.
famously, they were the only ones that didn't get totally colonized by some European nation. The Italians took a stab at it for a little while. Mussolini dumped a lot, like 500,000 troops into Ethiopia to try to take it over, and came up short.
Yeah, them and Libya are like the only two countries that not to get colonized.
Yep.
But in the 1970s, Ethiopia was taken over by a communist military dictatorship, and they held power until the early 90s, until 1991. But they were eventually overthrown by the the Ethiopian People Revolutionary Democratic Front, the EPRDF.
EPRDF.
And the EPRDF consisted of four parties, and these are the dominant parties today: the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, the Amara Democratic Party. The Amara are the second largest population and probably the most abused population in Ethiopia. The ADP, the Aroma Democratic Party, the ODP,
Oromo.
which is Oromo, which is the current majority and the heads of state, and then the Southern Ethiopian People's Democratic Movement, the SEPDM. What makes this really interesting is that they set up a federal government, a federal republic, and the constitution of this new government established was an ethnic federal system that gave different ethnic groups around the country autonomy from the centralized state. So the goal here was to end the suppressive, centralized control of the state from the communist regime prior, and then have a constitution
Hmm.
that guaranteed rights to develop one's own language and the rights to establish government institution in its own territory, and the rights to create militias. Now, most importantly about this constitution is that it gave territories unconditional rights to succeed from the nation,
Which some territories did immediately, specifically
which
Eritrea and Somalia.
some areas did immediately after the formation of the state. The Constitution was solidified in '94, I think, like the
Hmm.
formal articles that state that territories have the right to succeed. And that sounds, I mean, this ethnic federal system, it sounds fair, right?
I mean, from like first glance, sure, but there's always some skeletons in that closet.
Well, I mean, the system's a disaster. Like,
Right.
it doesn't work.
Hmm.
And I guess at the time when they were creating this system of government, people are like, "Oh, look at that! They're finding a way for these different ethnic groups to get along and create a unified state without I guess, infringing on their cultural origins,
Heritage. Hmm.
heritage, and these. Whenever you have a federal government involved that's overseeing these regional uh, ethnic areas, even if they are autonomous, it's still going to end up being a disaster. The issue really is that Ethiopia's census has more than 90 ethnic groups, but there's only really 9 ethnic defined regions within the country.
Right.
So they're only really official regions for designated majority ethnic groups.
Right. And it's not split evenly. It's not like 10 ethnic groups per, group. There's like areas like Tigray, which is majority Tigrayan, but I forget the specific here. I can pull up the map in a second. But there are like some specific ones like Gambela or the Oromia who are just majority one ethnic group, as opposed to the southern nations, nationalities, and peoples. I gotta show this map because it's crazy. Hold on. I'm gonna pull it up for you guys who are listening on the podcast. Just like Google it, just like map of Ethiopian regions. But we're looking at it here. This one right here, this little bitty one right here, Southern Nations, Nationalities, and Peoples region has the highest concentration of unique nationalities and ethnicities of any of the other ones. And this little section right here, the Sidama, was originally a part of it, but then just recently was promoted to its own thing. So like there are like a ton of different types of people in this one little section right here. But this bigger blue section, the Oromia, is basically, for the most part, one peoples. So it's not like evenly disparate. And then up here at the top, which is the one in question, Tigray, they've got about, I think, 6% of the population. Henry, can you double check that for me? I know
it's
that
about 6.3%. They're a minority, but they're a powerful minority,
right? Because
the revolution that overthrew the military dictatorship, it was like a 16-year war throughout the 80s. That was led by the TPLF.
Right.
They were spearheading that, and they conquered the Ethiopian state in '91, and they established this EPRDF. There's so many acronyms in African politics; it gets really hard to keep track of. But what they did is that they used this political party to initiate the reconstruction of this federal state. However, the Tigray people, within their own manifestos and their own papers, they already had a lot of animosity towards other ethnic groups that they were uniting with, specifically the Amara. Like there was a manifesto written in the 70s that said that that states that the Amara are the number one enemy of the Tigray people. For some reason, and I don't know African politics well, but I do know that for some reason the Amara are looked at as like this as a troublesome ethnic group. They're persecuted. They're treated like how Ukrainians used to be treated in like the 20s, or Kurds used to be treated
now.
So they're persecuted from both the Tigray and the larger majority Oromo groups. However, the TPLF, the question you want to ask is, why would the TPLF want to govern the entire state if they have issues with other ethnic groups? And they built up the power of this autonomous state. They really, I guess you could say that they've been accused of establishing this central government in order to take advantage of Ethiopia's natural resources and have the control of the Ethiopian military to expand the borders of Tigray, and their end game was to pretty much loot the state, loot the countryside using the power of the central government, and then succeed from Ethiopia altogether. That's what they're kind of being accused of. That's what they've been accused of over the past decade.
There's some merit to those accusations because there are some disputed border territories along the TPLF with the Amhara and separately along the border with Eritrea, who in this conflict currently has not engaged, but if they've got their own beef with the Tigray people, so it's very possible they can get in at any point.
Well, that's allegedly that's why they left that succession clause in the Constitution in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Is because they wanted to build up the state and have control over the resources and just be the main state administrators and
then pull out.
Have the deterrent if let's just say if there was another group that was trying to take power from them, they wanted the deterrent of being able to succeed from that union and causing strife within the country, like causing the country to go into chaos with their succession.
Right, they wanted to hold it by the balls, basically.
Yeah, essentially hold it by the balls, because they've been in power for a long time, since 2018. They've been in power.
Mm-mm.
Not since they were in power until 2018. Excuse me, I misspoke. They've been in power
30 years.
For about 30 years. They're also being accused of creating a system that would disintegrate Ethiopia into pieces with the intention of creating a Tigray class. So pretty much being the same thing as what the British used to do to their colonies in Africa and really in the Middle East. They used to in India, they used to pit different ethnic groups or different tribes against each other. And also in North America, they used to do the same thing with the Native Americans.
Right.
They used to pit tribes against each other. So that's what the Tigray are being accused of doing. Another reason is why this sort of government is really dumb is because the resources issues, like there's only so many resources to go around. So if you're defining these autonomous zones by ethnicity, then some ethnic groups are going to get the shit end of the stick.
Right.
Not all areas have access to important resources in Africa, like water or timber or land that you can actually pasture,
or coffee beans,
or crops or coffee beans.
That's a thing.
You can distribute land, but then that causes you to engage in ethnic cleansing. If you're going to put one ethnic group in some land at the expense of another ethnic group, it just causes you to engage in the practice of ethnic cleansing from that land. So looking at this from that context, how do you feel?
Well, I feel like there's some more backstory to unpack too, because I think that while we're setting this up to say, all right, the Tigray themselves had a hand in building modern Ethiopia as we know it today. If I remember correctly, who's this guy's name? Meles Zenawi, who is the founding member of the TPLF. He's literally the guy who wrote the Ethiopian Constitution in the early days, right? So as you point out, they wrote it in their favor, right? They knew that they weren't going to be a majority by population party, but they definitely wanted to give themselves a leg up in the new system, and they held on to power for quite some time, right? And it's funny too with this 30-year thing. It seems like 30 years seems like the expiration date of poorly run systems, right? Right about 30 years, it's all right, people have had enough.
It's the lifespan of the dictator who put everything together. That's
right.
Usually what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then do they have a successor or not?
Right.
So
And the turmoil around the successor as well, getting a successor, that is.
That's how long these governments last, until the guy dies.
And honestly,
unless he has a son.
This is what happened. This is exactly what went down in Ethiopia, because, you know, there had been signs of tensions between Tigray and the central government since Abiy came to power 2 years ago, right? Again, keeping in mind that Ethiopia is an extremely diverse system, they kept it together using those four basic, four ethnic-based parties, and, you know, TPLF held on to power, you know, with roughly an equal share of power, but that gave them a leg up against all the others, having only a 6% population. It's kind of like how in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate, how we award 2 members for every state regardless of its population, right? So, like, Wyoming has just as much power as California, despite the fact that California is like 600 times the population of Wyoming, right? And so they have a roughly equal say in the government, so they have like an outsized, you know, power there. And they were in this coalition with Abiy and his party for a minute, and there was this months-long popular revolt that happened in leading up to the election in 2018, where Abiy won. And then Abiy pretty much quickly took that mandate that he got from winning the election and taking over from the old guard, the TPLF, and he immediately set out to change the system. He wanted to change that four-party system to a single national prosperity party that was not organized on ethnic lines. And I think this, you know, basically left the TPLF feeling targeted and purged. Right? They were the minority, and they felt victimized by this because they felt like they were going to substantially lose their dominance over Ethiopia's political and economic life, which is absolutely true, right? And so the president of the Tigray region charged the prime minister with actually, like, you know, saying that, oh, you're trying to criminalize the TPLF. Like, you're specifically targeting the TPLF. But in actuality, it was just Tigray was just losing their political power, you know. Abiy came in from a populist movement, you know, to change how the government was set up away from this, like, ethnic federalist group to a more democratic group that's not organized around ethnicity, and they felt triggered by it, to be honest. This is how they felt about it. And so TPLF basically countered by breaking away from this new governing coalition, and they are accused of trying to unite some opposition forces within the rest of Ethiopia, so in other regions of Ethiopia, to try and, you know, undermine Abiy and the anti-federalist coalition, but that really didn't work out so well. And there's also no hard evidence of this either. This is just what I'm reading, so take that with a grain of salt. But in general, though, I think they've pretty much isolated themselves from this whole political process, and basically, you know, Abiy's democratic reforms, it just didn't sit well with the TPLF, with Tigray, and I think that, you know, this basically undermines their like stranglehold of power, right? So, like, how I'm feeling about it right now is that a group of old guard, you know, majority rulership is losing their power, and now they're freaking out about it. And now they're doing things that I think are very, very questionable. As an example, they recently held, so they've been putting off in elections in Ethiopia for quite some time, both regional and federal. And there was one scheduled for August 2020 that got postponed again. And basically, legislators from Tigray, they all protested this. A lot of them actually left the upper house. And in September, the TPLF basically held a sham election in Tigray, and they reported, you want to take a stab at like what they won, but you want to take a stab at what percentage they won by?
90% or something.
98%.
98%.
Right,
There was an election in, oh man, there was a couple of elections in Africa. I think it may have been in Sudan where the
Mm-hmm.
incumbent won by 90%. It
Mm-hmm.
was something so ridiculous. But
Mm-hmm.
these countries in Africa are among the most, if not the most corrupt countries on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, obviously, I think it's clear that this was not overseen by
yeah,
international observers, right? And for you folks who have been reeling over U.S. politics and like the election results here, like they had a real sham election where it was obviously clear that that it wasn't even mail-in ballots. It was just like they just declared victory with 98%. Um, and
in
so,
Yemen they had an election with one man on the ballot.
yep, that's true. I remember that. Yeah, yeah. So consider yourself lucky. Uh,
Hadi had a one. The guy that Hillary and wait, here's the kicker.
oh,
So
I love this one. Yeah.
Hadi, the successor uh, to the previous ruler Salih,
Mm-hmm.
he Salah, excuse me, he became president of Yemen, and it was seen as a crowning achievement in Yemenese democracy, according to Hillary Clinton, and he was the only man on the ballot,
The only man on the
the only
ballot.
guy on the ballot. But back to
Yeah,
Ethiopia.
sorry. So basically, they won by 98% in this September, election, quote unquote, if you can call it that. And this new these new legislators that they installed immediately declared that the federal government of Ethiopia was not legitimate and can't govern the country, and they refused to recognize the federal government, right? And I think that the Ethiopian National Assembly came back and they basically said your election was bullshit. They annulled it, and they've been butting heads ever since. And I think what they did that was the Ethiopian federal government, what they did that was particularly heinous in the eyes of the Tigray was that they decided to slash a ton of federal funding to the region. They just stopped giving them money. Now they kept giving individual municipalities like cities and villages and shit. They kept giving them money, especially because we're in COVID-19 and they can't just completely cut everybody off. But they weren't giving the centralized leadership in Tigray any money, and they flipped shit. TPLF flipped their shit for this. That was not cool for them. They thought it was tantamount to war, right? And this is how we got here, you know.
The question is that I mean, don't they have the right to succeed though?
They
Why
do.
can't they just go forward with succession?
That's
Why
and see that's the real question. That is the real question because they have within their constitutional rights the ability to secede, and evidently they've been given a mandate, a 98% mandate by their region to just do whatever the fuck they want. So why don't they? Why don't they just pull out? I personally think it's because it's not in their interest to do so, right? They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the natural resources, they don't have the geopolitical clout in the region.
they don't have port access?
They don't have port access, right? They would be literally islanded. And they've got some hostile neighbors, right? They got Eritrea, who they're not friends with, right on their border, who does have port access, who controls an important waterway, right? Who has been recently getting pretty friendly with the Abiy administration. And that's another one of their grievances, right? The Tigray folks were like, you guys are getting too close to Eritrea, and they already seceded, like they left the country. So you're like picking, these losers over us, and they're not even a part of our country anymore. Like that's how they feel. That's how they feel about this. Like if you put yourselves, into their narrative for a moment. But they'd be landlocked with not friendly neighbors and not all of the resources and not all of the major airports and infrastructure. They'd be fucked. They know what's best. They know what's best for them, and it's to stay in there. What's best for Tigray is for them to regain control of power of the federal government. And I don't think it's going to happen.
It seems like they're kind of fucked
A little bit.
because they can't leave and they can't stay, but they do have a big army because all
They
the
do.
because all of the military infrastructure that was built there was built during that border war they had with Eritrea. How do I pronounce that?
Eritrea.
Eritrea. Forgive me for my terrible pronunciation. They're because a lot of that military infrastructure. So I'm assuming all of their like anti-aircraft stuff, a lot of their military bases on that border, like they're all in the Tigray territory. So I mean, they could definitely put up a fight to the death if they wanted to.
Oh yeah, they could if they wanted to. And also keep in
They
mind
have a 250,000 man army. That's nothing to.
It's nothing to scoff at. And they also remember they spearheaded the military offensive that won them, the country in '91, right? Like they were the front. This is the reason why they call them the Liberation Front or Tigray People's Liberation Front. They were literally the front line in that war.
And the TPLF they're the ones who do all the dirty work. Like they're the ones who invaded Somalia,
right, and
butchered a lot of people. What I'm really worried about with this conflict is right now we don't really know too much of what's going on besides like report from Amnesty International. But I'm just worried about a lot of the a week prior, a lot of ethnic groups have been getting just massacred. Like just these stories similar to what you would hear about like Yazidi villages in Syria or in Iraq during the Syrian civil war. There was this in Amara village last week. Women and children, no military personnel. 57 people were butchered to death. It's getting extremely violent, and it seems like it could spiral out of control at any minute. Especially now that Abiy he has refused to come to the negotiating table. He's not talking peace right now. It's his time to kind of put the hammer down as a strong dictator. So
yeah, and I'm still not like, this is all very new to me, and I actually got very excited learning about like a new political system and like a new country, because we haven't really covered a lot of Africa in general, but definitely not Ethiopia. And I'm still learning about this, and I still haven't formulated my opinions on Abiy and whether or not his intentions for his government and his governing style is something that I agree with or not yet. But it seems to me that from the face of it, it looks like he's acting from a moral high ground here, right? It sounds like we have a separatist minority group who's losing control, that's causing trouble. That's what it looks like. What remains to be seen, and what troubles me about this, is that there's a media blackout. There's a phone blackout, so we can't see or hear anything that's going on the ground. I've heard reports of airstrikes, and how airstrikes go down, right? There's a lot of collateral damage that end up happening from this. You pointed out one such example, and so it's very easy to go down this slippery slope of, you're a populist leader, in a country that was rife with corruption, and you want to put down a region or a sect of people that are not cooperating with you, and it can very easily turn into an ethnic cleansing or a genocide or other human rights abuses. That can happen very, very quickly. And it remains to be seen whether or not Abiy takes, this power that he's acquired over the last 2 years through populism, and uses it for something positive for Ethiopia, or straight up dictators the shit out of it. That's a big open question.
Well, the media is portraying him as a bad guy right now.
Yeah.
A
What's
lot of
that?
the media, a lot of the media from Al Jazeera,
Mm-hmm.
um, Associated Press. I saw something on CBS actually. They're all painting him as like, oh, this guy won the Nobel Peace Prize 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Huh, I guess we gave the Nobel Peace Prize too soon. This guy's gone effed up right now.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, he's just trying to preserve the monopoly of violence um, on that country. Like they're trying to preserve the nation state.
Spoken
I think
like a
it's going to
true
get bad,
libertarian.
and that's what happens. And that's what happens when you have these types of systems of government. When you set up a government, an ethnic federal government, what do you think is going to happen? There's no way that can succeed in the long run.
Hmm.
Look what happened in Yugoslavia, because that's the major comparison. Like
Right.
that's you're looking at
The
it. If you
Balkan
want to look at a
states. Yeah.
conflict
Mm-hmm.
to compare this with, it's the Balkanization of Yugoslavia
Mm-hmm.
into countries like Croatia and Serbia and all these small little states. Um, that seems to be in effect and starting to spiral out of control, because I don't know if the way that it seems like they're going to have to put down Tigray is show a massive display of brute, blunt hammer force to bring them back into this union. And it seems like Tigray is not willing to go down without a fight right now, because they are used to being on top. 6% of the population has control of the majority of the government. I don't think that they want to remain that very not powerful ethnic group, because without the federal government, without the government that they presided power over the past 20 odd years or more than that, since 1991, they are a very, very small minority group with less than 10% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
Both the Oroma and the Amara are both 6 times larger than them in numbers wise.
Yep.
So while
But
they have bases and the military capacity to resist, I can imagine them doing that, and I can also imagine it getting really, really bloody.
I mean, but with that in mind, there are people. We don't want like an equally oppositely bad thing to happen to the Tigray people either, right? Right. Despite the fact that we
I mean, I
are
don't want anything. I don't think anyone wants any of this to happen.
right, right. Despite the fact that we're probably in agreement that this minority group, probably held on to power against probably the best interests of the country, right? We also don't want
Looting, and stealing. I mean, that's basically what was
right,
going on
because
in a
that's
nutshell.
what they wanted to. That's it was
That's
clear
what that's
what they
been
why
that's
they
been
did
going
that.
on. That's what's been going on, and that's what happened. That's what happens in a lot of these countries in Africa. These people ask why are countries poor in Africa. It's because of corrupt governments. It's because the governments loot the nation,
Hmm.
and they do it. Um, they're salesmen basically. A lot of these African dictators, they sell off the natural resources, and they don't make anything in return. So there's no way climbing out of poverty, and then the international aid system undercuts any type of business that they could potentially create, because you don't need to create a shoe factory if there is a international aid service that produces the foods.
Right.
So the political systems and the economic systems there never have a chance to really thrive. And in addition to that, the Europeans in America, mainly Europe. Europe still thinks that Africa is their playground, and they kind of treat it as it is their playground.
Right.
Where they in China now, they they they're
They
they
basically
give
just
them
drew a bunch of
predatory
like
IMF
lines.
loans.
Yeah, exactly. They just drew a bunch of lines in the formerly, colonized African nations and said, "Figure it out," right? But by figure it out, they mean we're gonna pull the strings and you're gonna do as we say, and we're gonna install people that are friendly to us economically, right? And rather than directly colonize you, we're just gonna quasi colonize you through, through predatory loans, as you say, or through taking natural resources at rock bottom prices. But I guess what I was trying to say though is that like while I agree that the Tigray people or the TPLF, specifically the government that was installed 30 years ago there, kind of started off with some like really questionable, shady, reasons. I would hate for there to be a situation where Tigray people, not government, that reside elsewhere in Ethiopia are persecuted and potentially like ethnically cleansed, because there are Tigray people that live elsewhere and they have no connections to TPLF government, who are right now at risk because we have a popularized and polarized government that is largely supporting Abiy, in this military campaign against like a minority region, right? So again, there is a slippery slope here. Abiy could turn out to be a very bad person.
And a lot of times these types of situations escalates that decline from, I guess, even if you consider someone to be a moral populist at one point, this is where when you have the state in your hand and you're able to use it like a hammer, usually these are the times this is where.
I mean, I'm feeling some echoes of like early Syrian civil war here. This is what it feels like to me. Can you see some parallels there?
I don't know. I don't think I can compare it with the Syrian civil war. I think it's a bit different. There's so many. I think Yugoslavia is a better way to compare it. With the Syrian civil war, a lot of that stuff was manufactured. A lot of that stuff was manufactured from outside powers. Like, yeah, there was definitely anti-Assad groups out, but first of all, Syria was in a better economic position, and the standard of living was better among most Syria, like the average Syrian, like the standard of living was higher. Another thing is that the rebels were funded by outside powers with the intent to overthrow the government and create a caliphate type Islamist type government. I think some people, like some groups, wish to balkanize that region in that area, and not just Syria but Iraq as well, into these smaller enclaves that were sectarian-ish and ethnically divided. So a Shia and a Sunni and a Kurdish state. I mean, we've already seen maps of that. We were going over that map with Danny Scherson. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I mean, hear me out.
The major
one,
difference is because there's so many different ethnic groups in Ethiopia, and also, I don't know if there's the same interest in the U.S. wanting to cause havoc there. I think the U.S. probably sees Ethiopia better off as stable rather than as a country that can get out of control.
I agree with that, but I don't necessarily think the outside influence would be coming from the United States. I think it'd be coming from elsewhere.
Where do you think outside influence would come from? So
particularly, I think it would be coming from Islamist groups in the region, because Ethiopia is obviously propped up by the West, specifically the U.S., to be the anchor state in that region, and they're the spring off point for literally everything in Africa. And specifically the Horn of Africa region. And I'd like to talk a little bit about like the Horn of Africa and some of the geopolitical implications of this, because I think it helps make my case here. Just one thing that I'll point out is that very recently some armaments were stopped at the border of Sudan heading for the Tigray region. And it's unclear where those armaments were coming from, but it's clear that someone is sending them weapons. Right. So while today it remains a internal like sectarian, divide issue, I think it can blow up. It is very rife for that situation, and there's a lot of instability in the Horn of Africa in general. We have to keep in mind, again, as you pointed out in the top of this episode, This is a country with a population of 110 million people. It's the second largest country in Africa. It's one of the largest in the world, and it shares a border with 6 African nations, right? All of which have very different styles of government. All of which are in very different, political situations right now. And there's so much instability and humanitarian issues that are going on in that region right now. I think if this goes on for very much longer, first of all, the big issue is that there's going to be refugees everywhere. Like,
there's already refugees pouring into the Sudan.
There's already so many of them in Sudan in the Gedaref state, which borders Tigray right now. I think there's more than 6,000 forces right now, Sudanese forces that are on the border in the Gedaref state, basically poised to make sure shit doesn't go down. But so many thousands of people are there. There are truckloads of people going into the Gedaref state in Sudan. And what's interesting about this is that Sudan and their leadership is poised very interestingly here, in being kind of peacekeepers, right? Because Sudan, I think it was like a few weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, the U.S. basically pulled Sudan off the list of U.S. State-sponsored terrorisms, right? So they're no longer a terrorist state, according to the U.S., and they've been getting a bunch of backing from a lot of Gulf states who approve of them and their actions with Israel, specifically the warming conditions with Israel. And so basically the Sudanese prime minister has some clout now, right? So he's trying to act as the mediator, the moderator between the two parties, but we're talking about a state that was recently a major terrorist state, or a major state sponsor of terrorism. Not to mention that Somalia has always been rife with issues, has always been crazy. Sea pirates. That's the least of the concern, right? I think that this could easily turn into a situation where if this keep in mind that Tigray forces, they're not a small military. You said 250,000 people in their army. They have plenty of armaments. They have plenty of weapons. They can fight. And if this is a protracted war, like right now, as an example, Ethiopia has had to pull its security presence from its neighbors. So as an example, they tend to be the peacekeepers in the region, propped up by the United States. And in recent weeks, they've actually been pulling. There was a report by Reuters that said that if they keep redeploying their troops away from the border of Somalia, that those areas will become more vulnerable to Al-Shabaab, which is an Al-Qaeda-linked insurgency. Right, so Al-Qaeda's fucking around over there, And right now, if they're moving all their troops away from that border so that they can fight a war with themselves, what do you think is going to happen then?
Well, I think what will create a potential large terrorist threat in Ethiopia or an Islamic insurgency would be if there was a state sponsor, most likely. I don't know. I'm trying to put my Machiavellian hat on. Who would have an interest in imploding the country and just causing an absolute chaotic war in the Horn of Africa? This is worst case scenario. Who would have that interest in doing that? I don't think really any state has that interest in doing something like that. The only one, if I'm just shooting from the hip right here, but maybe, and I'm putting an absolute Machiavellian hat on. I don't necessarily think this is true, but I'm just throwing this out here.
Saudi Arabia?
Maybe, I was thinking, well, no, I don't think Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia has some interest in keeping it stable there because they don't want the Gulf of Aden to be a dangerous shipping lane, especially when there is a threat of the
So then,
Strait of Hormuz
so then,
being
then
shut
it's got to be
down.
Iran.
Maybe it could be Iran. Let's just say, I mean, that's what the U.S. would say. That's what the U.S. would use as a pretext. If there was any Shia on the shore of the Horn of Africa, would be immediately condemned as Iran. They would be like, "Oh, the Houthis are now linking up with forces in
Yeah, right
Somalia, the
across the
Tigray
river.
region. The
Right.
extent of Iran's proxies are going across into Africa." Well, yeah, I just thought about that,
Put
and Iran.
put your tinfoil hat on and fucking buckle up for this one. What if this is a conspiracy? Like super clear. I've not read this anywhere. I have no data for this, but I'm just playing this game. Biden, president, wants to look tough, says that Iran is fucking around, sends troops in because Ethiopia is our they're our stable state. They're the anchor state. We have to help them out because people are fucking because Al Qaeda, Al Shabaab specifically, is messing around and they're getting money from the Iranians. How about that?
Al Shabaab getting money from the Iranians.
Yeah.
I mean,
Does that even make sense? Because I might be just blending all of my Islamists together.
Al Shabaab is not a Shia group; it's a Sunni group.
So that wouldn't make
So
sense then. No.
it most likely. I mean, they'd have to. I mean, I can see the State Department making that stretch because most people
Don't get it.
most people don't even
Right.
understand the nuances, the very high level nuances. But I mean, I don't know. I could think of some things off the head. Hey, maybe Turkey's doing it because Turkey wants to make a refugee crisis that will most likely end up having millions of refugees go to Europe and have who knows. But I guess I think most states probably have more of an interest of making sure that Ethiopia doesn't implode, especially now that COVID. And I'm super cynical, where I think that the government is usually involved in most things that are bad on an international level. But I mean, man, I'd have to have somebody convince me of that, like really show me, like, okay, this is a policy paper to make this fucking place go bleed and be destructive. Like, I haven't seen anything like that. Like, I haven't seen a policy paper that's like, we need to destabilize the Ethiopia and Somalia and this entire region so it goes into chaos and war.
I mean, I just don't believe that. I don't believe
there
that would be a paper that you would find from like some American think tank, but you might find it elsewhere in the world.
You could, but even before like the Iraq War, like, I mean, there are many papers on destroying Iraq and invading these countries and breaking them up into little small pieces. I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, so
like that.
you're saying it's
But maybe
it's
I'm just ignorant.
unlikely.
Maybe someone can direct me to that type of stuff.
So you're
but
saying
I
it's
haven't.
unlikely because there's so far there hasn't been any like foreshadowing for it yet, right?
Well,
That's
you
why
can
you're
tell
saying it.
a lot of that I have seen. Like, I haven't seen anything like that. Maybe it exists completely. Like, I'm kind of a noob when it comes to African politics, so
Same.
I'm speaking out of my out of ignorance in a lot of this stuff. But it's hard for me to like even stretch why a state would want a country full of 110 million people to implode just for the sake of imploding. Like, it seems like Ethiopia is just a ticking time bomb. It's their structure of government, the fact that they have a system of government where there's a central government that presides over ethnic autonomous zones, that has a clause in their constitution that lets states succeed from that union, but they can't really succeed because that would kind of put them on an island from the rest of the continent. So they're kind of forced into this union by the deterrent of being
it's a relationship of convenience,
state.
basically.
Yeah. The fact that they're kind of unstuck in this kind of really lousy system for a lot of people, or as far as maybe it's good for creating increasing Ethiopia's GDP compared to other African countries. However, I don't think it's good for the probably the overall health of the nation to have a system set up like that. And I think that this is more so the consequence of having a of ethnic federalism and people groups fighting for power of the government. Like if you have different ethnic groups and they're pitted against each other for ultimate control of the central government, and the central government's able to dish out powers or dish out favors or dish out favoritism to different groups, then I think that's ultimately will always be a huge issue and will always create the type of civil unrest that could eventually lead to a nationwide conflict.
I mean, I agree with that. So let's take a look maybe at the Prime Minister Abiy's ideas about unifying into a single coalition peace party or whatever he wants to call it, where it's not divided by ethnic ethnicity, but rather just by region. How do you feel about that? Do you think that that's like an appropriate transition away? Do you think that would work better?
If they created an autonomous, so by region, but not by ethnicity.
Yep. Because that's apparently, and I'm still learning about this too, right? So I might be getting this wrong, but from what I understand, Abiy's idea is to create a new type of government that's around regions, not around ethnicity, and that they want to decouple the ethnicity part of their power in politics away from it, because ethnicities and peoples like the TPLF, the government of the TPLF, they hold outsized power against majority groups like the Omoros, which he is a part of.
As long as the system of government doesn't participate in any type of regional favoritism, because that can happen too. If a government favors an ethnic group, or if they favor a region, it's the same type of thing. You're picking one group other than the other. I mean, that happens in a lot of countries where you'll see a central government favor urban areas rather than rural areas, and they'll actually incentivize. They'll tax the farmers to pay for their manufacturing sectors, to build up their manufacturing sectors, and that causes a lot of poverty outside in their rural areas, and it creates a really big kind of class divide. The class divide, man. So I think that has the opportunity to be really destructive within a state as well. I think the main thing is just limiting the amount of kind of special grants and special favoritism that the central authorities can give, because people are always going to fight for that type of power. I mean, look at the U.S., man. And now, I mean, we got to go back to the election right now. Let's just use our election as an example. Mm-hmm. So the United States is, I think, genuinely, most people are very friendly, are very generous people in the U.S.
Sure. Most
of your neighbors you get along with most people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. Most people are pretty kind. If you drop your wallet, most people will return it to you. Americans are generally nice to each other. Would you agree?
100%.
No matter what in your politics, rarely ever comes up. Mm-hmm. Like, I can know someone for a decade, never know their politics, and I imagine a lot of people, for most people who are not politically active, that's people don't really know people's politics. It used to be in this country where talking about politics, it was like a taboo.
Right.
There's like a really funny Dave Chappelle bit where he's like white people don't want to ever talk about politics, but they'll talk about like other obscene stuff. Mm-hmm. So he's like, Dave, don't bring up politics at the table. And he's like, all right, where was I? So I was fucking my wife in the ass.
Yeah.
um, so
When politics was more taboo than talking about anal. That was
yeah.
the days. Those were the days.
So, but now people are, at least for this period of time, like I guess over the past 4 years with Donald Trump, people definitely got more engaged in politics, whether they've become more conservative or more liberal or whatever. Right now, it's at an all-time peak because we've had like a 4 year. We're basically at the last season of Game of Thrones, and instead of it being season 8 being a complete wash, we're at like season 8, and it's like, just as compelling and interesting.
Yeah.
There's all this crazy plot twists and all that stuff, and people are their anxiety levels up because they feel the stakes are so high. To be completely honest, the chances are between Joe Biden and Donald Trump governing in a way that's significantly different from one each other is not really that big.
Nope.
Like, there's going to be policy changes, but overall, their foreign policy will probably be really similar.
Just like wrapped up with a different bow. That's it.
Both of
Right.
both of their economic policies will be about spending money. It's like
Yeah.
Republicans will be like, Donald Trump was the best Republican president ever. Well, Donald Trump, if you're going by
Increased the budget deficit by like $4 trillion or something like that.
Yeah, if you're going by those standards of what Republicans used to stand for, like being fiscally responsible, then he spent more money than Barack Obama in his first 4 terms. So I think that's just the general trend, is that the U.S. is just going to keep on printing money and keep on being fiscally reckless until the printing press breaks, until we just literally can't. We run out of ink on the dollar. I don't think that's really going to change too much. No matter who's president. Is probably this is kind of a side tangent, but a Biden presidency and a Republican Senate probably mitigates the amount of money printing and government spending, just because Republicans always kind of find their stones whenever there's a Democrat in office, and they'll be like, oh, we can't spend that much. But I digress.
You were going to talk about Ethiopia, though.
People seem to really. All right, the point I'm trying to make is that people in the U.S., no one's going to go to your fucking house from the rival political opposition and strip you of your stuff, most likely. People are going to tax you higher. But there's not going to be like some large-scale systematic oppression from one group to another in the U.S. I know we're polarized, but that's just not likely to happen.
Right.
And look at us. Like, people are going fucking crazy over politics in the U.S. right now. Now, the reason why people are so divided in the U.S. is because of the stakes, because our federal government is so powerful. Imagine if the stakes were higher, like the federal government, who was in power, and the federal government literally meant your like real economic depression. Like, okay, if if someone in my ethnic group becomes president, we'll live a comfortable lifestyle.
We'll all be rich.
The opposite comes, I'll live in complete poverty and shit.
Right.
Like, if the stakes were that high.
And not even just like the memes that you see on both sides about how the economy is going to go to shit if the other side wins. We're not talking about that. We're talking about like the actual implications, right? Where like overnight the shift of wealth will happen.
Yeah.
Literally,
overnight,
like literally, not metaphorically, not hyperbolically, like literally, money will change hands immediately.
If there's like a high amount of people from one group who work for the government and they're automatically just fired,
right
afterwards, and then replaced by people of the opposite. Like, imagine if you're a bunch of, and just take this election for example, of a bunch of Republicans after Biden is inaugurated. You have like every single Republican who works for the government fired, like every single one, and then replaced by
a Democrat.
Like every cop, like every Republican cop is fired and replaced by a cop that's a Democrat.
Right.
What do you think the cops who were Republicans would do?
Right, they would fucking revolt. It would be nuts.
They would revolt. That's what happened in Iraq
after
we disbanded the Saddam's army and we fired them all. We fired all the government workers. They became the leaders of the rebellion.
Right.
So when the stakes are really high, and it's on ethnic lines. I mean, there's a lot of like kind of Machiavellian type like politicking that goes on between like making alliances with this ethnic group and that ethnic group and this ethnic group. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of silly. Like civic nationalism is more effective, and I'm saying this as a libertarian, but like civic nationalism is a healthier way to live in a nation rather than ethnic nationalism, which is the worst way to divide a country is through ethnic nationalism or sectarian nationalism. They're both terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I think ethnic nationalism is worse because you can't change your ethnicity.
Yeah, you can choose your political party, but you can't choose your like how you were born.
You could change your religion, but usually religion is a political term anyway,
right.
Because when your ethnicity becomes a political, because that's essentially what it is in a country like Ethiopia. Like
when your ethnicity
is a political
mm-hmm.
group,
right? Well, that's why I was talking about like the Tigray people who live outside of the Tigray region are in like at real risk of being persecuted because of this.
Yeah. So the stakes are that high. That's why
mm-hmm.
they're resisting, and they're ready. They have a 250,000 man army that's ready to fucking fight.
That's dangerous, dude.
That's why it's so dangerous to have a system set up like that, mm-hmm. because there's always going to be one ethnic group that is going to benefit at the expense of the other. There's only so many resources. There's only so many resources to go around in a country, and dividing it within ethnic lines is just the people who said it was going to be a disaster in the 90s when they did. They're being proven right now, and I think the current conflict is the consequence of that failed system rather than foreign power or someone else trying to wag the tail on a specific group to fight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is some crazy shit. I think I definitely want to pay attention to this. I think this could be hotter than the Azerbaijani and Armenian conflict that's going on.
I think it already is at this point. I mean, it's certainly at pace. Right now, there's a ceasefire in Navarno in Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh. There's a ceasefire right now that Russia negotiated. At this point, I mean, Vladimir Putin needs to get some type of Nobel Peace Prize. The guy has made more peace deals than like anyone I could think of at the top of my head.
I won't join you on that nomination, but sure.
I nominate Vladimir Putin and Dennis Rodman as the two.
I'm on board with Rodman. We can give Rodman one. I think he deserves it. He's fine.
As the two peace bringers.
Yeah, hoops for peace all day.
How far are we? We're an hour and 16 minutes into this podcast. Do you want to switch real quick to another topic, or do you want to continue this?
Up to you, man. I've expended my note capability on this one anyway.
So Trump is bringing in Douglas McGregor as a senior Pentagon advisor, and it seems to be a sign that they're going to push before he goes, if he goes.
That's a real fucking question.
Hey, last podcast you said you thought he was going to stay.
I mean, in court.
Did you change your mind? Do you recant?
I haven't decided.
Do
yet.
You recant?
I haven't decided. I could be wrong. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, to be very honest.
Do you recant?
No, I think just to close the loop on that, I think increasingly his chances of winning even in the courts are super slim. Like even if he gets, I think in the two major states that he's going after, Pennsylvania and Arizona, even if he does win and gets a lot of votes from those places, he still loses. So I don't know.
So interesting enough, it looks like I think this is a political move. We were discussing it a little bit on our Patreon, by the way. So Trump is pulling it looks like he said he wants to pull out of Afghanistan by Christmas. Um, if he pulls out of Afghanistan and let's say Syria, Kamala Harris already said some really cringe thing about supporting Syrian opposition forces today, just saying, yeah, we're going to continue the policies that pretty much destroyed the country. If Trump pulls out completely, and that's still a big if, I'm still not sold this is going to happen completely, but I'm crossing my fingers. He pulls out of both of those regions. Probably more likely Afghanistan they'll pull out than Syria. I still feel like they're going to leave. So they're going to always leave troops in Syria. But if they pull out and then they go back in, if the Biden administration goes back in, that would be a political. I hate to say it, but Donald Trump would probably be like, "Oh, look, I pulled him out and you put him back in. This is the swamp. This is why I came before. This is why I'm coming back in 2024 to come back and take him out because the corporate Joe Biden."
Right. I mean, I wouldn't put it beyond Donald Trump to pull him out literally on January 19th, like the last fucking day that he's president. That would be the day that he gives that order, and then you know, God forbid anything legitimate or illegitimate happens in any of those regions, and we need any troops for any reason, positive or not. Donald Trump is going to hammer Biden for even thinking about putting troops back in.
Oh yeah, and then he'll start talking about the military-industrial complex. Like, they held my hand all the time. You didn't think about it.
I needed to wait till the last day, otherwise they were gonna,
I cannot wait for him to go on like Joe Rogan.
I doubt he'll be on Joe Rogan. I think he's gonna start his own thing. He's gonna make that Trump TV nonsense. I think that's what he always wanted anyway. I don't think he wanted. I don't think he actually wanted to be president. I think he just wanted to like fucking be in the spotlight.
So do you think everything he's doing right now is just political, like showmanship?
No, I mean I think like eventually when he won, he was like, oh shit, now I gotta be president. So
this
like
plane is pretty fucking cool.
Huh?
It's got to be pretty cool to like, oh look, here's Air Force One.
Yeah.
Like that's what I've always figured is like the major perk of being
Hell
president.
Yeah, and he's definitely
like,
taking advantage
Air
of that.
Air Force One. Fuck yeah.
What was it like?
Everything else seems awful.
He spent like a shit ton of money on flying that damn plane around, back and forth from Mar-a-Lago just to play golf and shit. I digress. I think he was probably fucking around for a while until he got the nomination, and he's like, oh shit, I can actually probably win this. And then that's when he got serious about it. But like honestly, I think he prefers just to make money and be shady and talk shit like an old man. Like I think that's where he's happiest, when he's just talking shit with no repercussions.
Well, I think in some way he could be a bigger thorn to the establishment in that capacity, outside of like having to do what the establishment wants. He could as a media figure, as a much larger media figure, unless he's just completely kicked off all platforms, then.
Well, I mean, if you that's why he would make his own, right? If you assume that 75 million people voted for him, right? If you assume that all of them would be even tacitly interested in anything that Trump has to do after he leaves office, like let's say he makes his own, TV network or some shit like that, or whatever, 75 million people. For like fun fact, there's like 35 million people on Twitter. There's only 35 million people on Twitter. Imagine if he gets half of the people that voted for him to like follow him on whatever it is that his next thing is, whether it's like a TV show, whether it's maybe he makes his own fucking social media, maybe he boosts Parler, which by the way is banning people. Free speech my ass.
Dan Bongino. Isn't it Dan Bongino created it?
Yeah.
Hey, it's Dan Bongino. I'm the conservative Italian guy who used to be from the Secret Service.
He offered a bounty.
Hey, fuck you, eh?
He offered a bounty for Twitter or Facebook personalities with more than I think it was like 12 million or something like that. No, more than 50,000 followers on either Facebook or Twitter. If you had that and you joined Parler, that he would give you like some amount of money. It was like $12,000 or some shit or $20,000. I forget. He was literally trying to bribe liberals to come on the platform. And then I just read a news story recently that said that like a bunch of like liberals have been joining Parler just to troll conservatives in their safe space, and they've been getting banned. And evidently Parler is supposed to be this free speech platform, but if you look at their terms and conditions, it says that they can basically censor you whenever the fuck they want for whatever reason or no reason at all, just like Twitter and just like all the other ones, which is just amazingly hilarious. Anyway, I'm digressing really hard. If half of the people who voted for Trump decide to follow him and do whatever it is that he decides he wants to do media-wise, he would immediately have an equal number of users or viewers as Twitter. Just let that sink in for a second.
So maybe they won't ban him.
Maybe not.
I'll just make my other thing. Trump Twitter. That's what I'll call it. It should be interesting, but so far with the people Biden has been putting, who are rumored to have high cabinet positions, pretty negative right now. We will see, but it looks like it's just going to be Obama, more Obama.
Well, he picked his chief of staff from when he was VP to be his chief of staff now. It's a big surprise. So,
and they're already talking about sanctions in Syria, and it's gonna.
We'll see.
Don't have high hopes, but I guess we'll see. We will treat Joe Biden in the same way we treated Donald Trump. That's what I could promise you. Which was, I feel fair. I feel like we treated Trump pretty fairly, to be completely honest.
We ragged on him when he sucked, and we gave him credit when he's deserving of it.
We'll treat Sleepy Joe fair. All right, let's finish this thing up. All right, so thanks guys for. Oh, do we have an episode thing in the mailbag?
We do, but you know what? I didn't get a chance to really do all the research. Owen, I hear you. I promise next episode we'll talk about it.
All right. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Bro History. If you like the show, make sure that you rate and review the podcast on Apple. Rating, reviewing our podcast on Apple Podcast is the number one way to help us grow. It really does mean a lot to see the reviews come in as well. So rate and review the podcast is easy. Just press that 5-star thing on your phone. And then if you want to join our Patreon, you can join it for just $1. You get access to our Slack. So our Slack account is like a kind of like a instant messenger thing. What's the best way to describe it?
People know what Slack is.
I know some people don't know what Slack is. It's a messaging thing.
It's a messaging platform. It's
and
fun.
We get some heated debates.
It gets spicy
sometimes. It gets pretty spicy on there. So we have a pretty diverse range of people on it. So it's not like an echo chamber. We have liberals, we have libertarians, we have
conservatives,
more conservative people, and everyone is.
We got people from all over the world.
It's fun. We have people from all over the world. So join the Patreon, and then is there anything else? There's also additional content on there as well.
Yep.
So is there anything else I'm forgetting to plug?
Nope. Some good. We're having some good guests on in the next few weeks. So get pumped about that. We're bringing guests back.
And stay tuned for future episodes. All right, let's end this. Peace.